Shida could see James slowly turn in place as he reacted to the crowd's reaction. His face was stuck in an unsure state as it came into view at first. He still had the determination from the answer he was previously giving to a question that had been asked by one of the visitors with a lot of passion. However, it was slowly being replaced by the surprise and confusion of what was going on behind him while he was in the process of turning. One of his eyebrows had risen up, and the corners of his mouth were slowly turning into a pondering frown. However, as soon as his eyes fell onto the sight of just what had caused the reaction, they immediately widened, and with them his entire face went into a wide-open expression of surprise for just a second, before then almost immediately furrowing into a displeased scowl. Shida could see his jaws clench and his eyes narrow as his face finally settled on the expression, staring at the elder lumbering onto stage with a look that was anything but welcoming. Unlike the guards or even Shida herself had first reacted, there was not even a hint of reverence or respect on his face, only distrust, discontentment, and a small hint of anger. Quist took a moment longer to react than James did, as they were clearly not as immune to the councilman's reputation and aura as James was, and so the human had the lead when it came to engaging with the new arrival. And he took it in a heartbeat, not even waiting for Afna to greet him, before he loudly spoke up himself. "You were not invited here," he loudly announced, with the same outdoor voice that he had used to answer the people's questions while up on stage, meaning that he wanted to be heard. "This is not a free-for-all. If you want a platform, you've got to arrange it for yourself, instead of trying to invade ours." Crossing his mechanical arm over his biological one, James kept up his scowl as he stared at the man, almost as if he was waiting for him to walk right back off stage after the announcement. Meanwhile, the audience of people watching this almost universally sucked in a deep breath at the brazen lack of respect the human's words carried. Soon enough, it shifted into not-so-quiet whispers and mumbles among each other, as everyone seemingly had to ask their neighbour if they heard the same thing they did. However, despite being the target of James's words, Afyona did not share the people's reactions in the slightest. In long, strangely high yipping sounds, the old man began to let out hoarse laughs that loudly filled the room. Despite its age and the clear signs of use it showed, his voice was still quite strong.
"I would say introductions are in order, but I believe I am almost as famous as you are."
Afyona opened at first, rubbing his hands along his arms for a moment as he stepped a bit closer to the human.
"I have simply come here to talk,"
he then explained, and his strangely crossed eyes quivered as they tried to gain a direct focus on the smaller man standing directly in front of him while looking down. His four eyes were stiff as a board and did not emote whatsoever, which caused a shudder to run down Shida's spine as she observed, even if she knew that was probably anatomically caused. "Schedule an event," James almost immediately responded, with his arms still crossed, and nothing about his posture indicated that he even slightly shared the old man's humour. "I am not here for a debate." Afyona lifted his rounded head a bit, and his yipping laugh continued yet again while his gill-like nostrils flared all over his face, causing it to almost look like it was cut open in places.
"Debate? No, I wish to talk,"
Afyona rebutted, though Shida found he was kind of proving James's point by instantly contradicting him.
"This is a public dialogue, is it not? And pray tell, am I not part of the public?"
There was another wave of mumbling from the crowd at the old man's words, while James lowered his head and shook it slowly with a sigh, still keeping his arms crossed. "Not if you go by the spirit of the meaning instead of the letter," he said, his voice now dipping into annoyance, and it seemed like he wanted to add even more onto that. However, it was then that Quist had sufficiently shaken out of their first moment of shock to quickly waddle up to James and pull on his pant leg in order to interrupt him. James glanced down at them instead of continuing his statement, and the Andaliah began to eagerly sign up to him. "James," they said, and they moved in a way that would cover most of their movements from the view of the crowd, keeping this conversation a secret between them and everyone who stood behind the stage. Afioner is a much respected man. If he is here to talk, then maybe that is an opportunity we should use. James broke his constant scowl for a moment, to smile down at his friend, but even then, he still shook his head once more. Sorry, Chris, he said, now much more quietly so the entire room wouldn't hear what he was saying. However, for Sheeda's ears it was still clear as day. I'm just not as much of a politician as you are, and I am so done playing nice with respected people. As he spoke, Afioner took a few steps closer to him, up to the point where he would have theoretically been at the right distance to reach out and touch James, if he wanted, although he wisely forewent that option.
My friend,
the elderly man then announced down at the human, raising the conversation's volume once again up to a level that would be heard far and wide.
I apologize for making it seem like I am crashing your event. The truth is, it has simply already been much too long before we finally met face to face.
James's face almost immediately soured again, after Afioner had only said his first 2 words. Still, he waited patiently for the man to finish his statement, before speaking up about what irked him. I do not believe it is appropriate for you to address me in that way, he stated firmly, but not disrespectfully this time. Although his voice was stern, what he said truly sounded like an honest request. We are not friends. I would highly prefer it if you stuck to using my name or title. To Sheeda's surprise, Afioner appeared to be honestly taken aback by that. Admittedly, she had absolutely no idea what to make of the old legend that had so suddenly showed up without any warning. To her, his behaviour seemed a lot like the old man was trying to irritate and provoke James, with his quirks and strange habits. After all, judging by James's reaction, she expected that maybe he knew something that she didn't, and that there was likely hostility to expect from this man, like there was from many other long-established figures of the galaxy. However, the honest surprise and even slight sadness on the man's face that appeared the second James had said that he was not his friend, it made her reconsider. Of course, it could very well be that this man who had lived longer than she and the humans in her company combined was just a very well-practiced actor, but giving the benefit of the doubt, it very much seemed like he may just really have been a bit eccentric. Quiz also reacted to the man's face, tilting their head up again while making urgent arm motions towards James. However, the human's gaze was directed firmly upwards, not seeing their signs as they tried to speak to him. The surprise and sadness slowly disappeared from Afioner's face, as he seemingly suppressed them, though a slight hanging of the corners of his round mouth remained.
You are right, we are not. But this almost makes it seem like you don't want to be friends, James,
the man stated, and a waving shudder spread across his entire short grey fur for a moment.
Are you not looking for friends, young man?
The corner of James's lips opened and revealed his teeth underneath, as he released a scoffing breath through them, while bringing his eyes up to try and look directly into those of Afioner, even if their anatomy seemingly proved difficult for making direct eye contact with, as James's gaze kept subtly darting from one iris to another, not sure which to focus on. I have met some people you call your friends, and none of them are friends of mine. So, since I believe you can learn a lot about a person by the company they keep, I would prefer it if you did not behave too familiarly with me. James explained concisely once again, and his choice of words began to match that of the man he was talking to. A subtle wave-like motion then went through his entire arm, as he still held it crossed, revealing that there were no bones or normal joints underneath the cover of his clothes with the unnatural motion. If Afioner noticed the motion, he did not show it. He simply put on a face filled with consternation at James's seeming determination to not make this an all-too-friendly encounter. The murmurs in the crowd were getting louder at this point, although everyone was talking over each other so much that it was basically impossible to understand any single thing that was being said. Much clearer, however, were the flashes of cameras, as pictures were being taken of the scene, as James and Afioner seemingly stared each other down, even if the reality of the situation was a lot less dramatic than it would look on film. Sheeta couldn't help but scowl a bit at the thought of what the media would make of all this again. It really wasn't like James was in need of any more bad press. And as tired as he was of playing nice, even Shida wasn't sure if one of the most beloved figures in the galaxy really was the one to pick a fight with in their current situation, especially since he didn't seem like he was outright hostile in any way. Also, by now, Quiz seemingly had more than enough of being ignored, forgoing their preferred signing as they raised their croaking voice. "James!" they said. Not quite able to speak across the entire room like the human, and Pethersley could, but still more than loud enough to be heard by the man they were standing right next to. "Could we at least hear him out? He has helped lead the galaxy for longer than anyone else. Maybe he has something to say that you would like to hear." Although James's immediate reaction was to scowl once again, Quiz's pleas had not fallen entirely on deaf ears, because suddenly those in the crowd that were standing close enough to pick up on the Andalire's words now also raised their voices, as James did not show any intention to oblige right away. "Yeah, hear him out!" one of them yelled, with his flexible arms raised. "You owe him that much? He's the only reason you're even still here," another joined in aggressive plucking. "Show some respect. He led the galaxy long before you were even born." "Check your behavior." "Has no one ever taught you manners?" "Is that how Deathwarders conduct themselves towards those who reach out a hand?" One after another, more and more people joined into the calling, even those further in the back who had no idea what originally prompted the yelling, but joined in anyway, since they agreed with the sentiment. Shida's ears lowered a bit as she saw James's face. The scowl on it had slowly melted away the more the calls were going on, and are now being replaced by a tired, almost bracing expression as he closed his eyes for a moment and breathed deeply, very clearly preparing for his attempt to get the situation back under control, likely while also trying to not have to give up his position in the process. However, with a firm, "That is quite enough," a different voice echoed throughout the room before James could act upon his preparation, and immediately everything fell quiet. Afina had erected himself to his full height, his crossed eyes wide open as he looked over the crowd. "Have some etiquette," the old man then continued, to admonish the riled-up Koivarees, many of which were sinking into themselves, as if it was their parent personally scolding them. "The candidate is on this stage to speak his mind, and that is exactly what he did. You are free to disagree with him, but one at a time. We do not yell over our opposition." There were a lot of sheepish glances and quiet mumbles of pretend apologies from the audience. Although Afina had technically come to his aid, James still didn't quite look happy as the elder once again turned in his direction. "Terrible things were done to you, young man." Afina opened his next statement, immediately dispersing the notion that likely many in the audience held, Shida herself included, that he was going to stick to the official version of events that stated it was unsure what exactly had taken place between James and the Leader Supreme during the time they had spent together. He came right out and admitted that something had been done to the human, and while everyone processed that, Afina leaned down slightly closer to James as he continued. "I was not one of the people who did it to you. Are you holding such a grudge purely because of the people I used to call my friends?" James's lips fell completely into a frown. It was clear he felt put on the spot here. However, then he closed his eyes. He breathed in, held, and then breathed out. His posture opened up as his arms slid away from each other, settling at his sides, and when he opened his eyes again, they were firm and resolute. "You can talk fancy allowances all you want," he said, his voice calm but very much firm. "But you heard it yourself. You helped rule the galaxy for longer than anyone else. For many, you are the face of the Galactic Council. You are who people think of when they think of authority. Under no one has the galaxy prospered for as long as it did under you." He paused for a moment to look into Afina's eyes. Despite their resolution, James's irises were shaking as he kept up his intense stare, seemingly moved by a deeply suppressed emotion that even Shida couldn't make out. Finally, he continued. "And under no one else did the people I have promised to help suffered for as long as they did under your lead." Once again, there was that mix of audible inhales and exclamations from the crowd. "You're right. You may not have been part of the people who tortured me, who maimed me, who threatened and tried to kill my friends." James kept talking, his emotions breaking out of their shell for a single moment, as the mention of violence against those he loved, before he immediately brought it back down again. "But you were there, for year after year. While the people suffered, while those people caused it. Nobody was there for as long, and you may not have been the one causing it yourself, and you may not have been the only one. There were many others, but what I couldn't say for many others is this. I can be sure that you were not trying to do anything about it, because I know for a fact that, when you speak up..." He paused for a moment and gestured behind himself, at the very crowd that had been shut up by the old councilman just earlier, and was now once again stunned into silence as they were publicly used as an example. "Then people will listen." James finished his sentence, having sufficiently made his point. "So you couldn't have said anything too meaningful about it? So no, honestly, I appreciate the offer, but no, I do not want your friendship. Because you were complacent for so long, the people who did this to me..." He paused again, now gesturing to his arm, and this time there was nothing subtle about the motion, as he allowed the mechanical appendage to sway for a moment, bending and writhing like a snake, as it motioned completely unrestricted by bodily limits. "They wanted me to meet you, because they were sure they could use you as a tool," he elaborated further. "So, in all honesty, it makes complete sense to me that you would be so open towards me, despite our obvious difference in values. Because, after all..." James stopped again, staring right up with his quivering eyes. And now his lips curled slightly up as well, though the smile that appeared on his face was anything but happy. Almost evil, but not quite. More angry, as his lips pulled apart wildly to reveal the teeth underneath, their white surface almost glinting in the light. Then he finally finished, as he lowly rumbled, "I will be just another problem that you could ignore." Things got really quiet after that. Sheeta wasn't sure if the many people listening had actually been moved by James's words in any way, or if they were simply too stunned by his theatrics to know how to react to it all. She certainly didn't quite know how to feel. This was an odd behavior for James. Usually he was either amenable towards people, entirely indifferent, or he had a strong personal dislike towards them. This impersonal antipathy that almost bordered on disdain whenever his voice raised slightly, it seemed so unlike him, at least from how she had experienced him during their time together. And yet, when she looked at his face, at that angry smile that filled his lips, and the shaking eyes inside of a very firm stare, she couldn't help but think that it seemed like he was almost feeling comfortable in it, like this was something much more natural to him than the extreme personal wrath and hatred that he felt towards those that were actively working against him. He usually seemed uncomfortable about that afterwards, even if he meant every word and every action that came out of him during those moments. Looking at his face now, Sheeta could tell James would not even think about regretting a single word that he had said just now. She swallowed heavily, as Afiona finally moved again. He had almost entirely frozen after James's tirade at first, but now he shifted his stance slightly, and briefly brushed his hands along his arms, as if he wanted to dust himself off. For a split second, the movement almost made Sheeta think that the old man was preparing to take a swing at James, but luckily she had been entirely wrong, as he simply settled into his previous position once more, likely because he couldn't comfortably hold a different one for longer than a few moments, and spoke up again. "Words," the old, now slightly less impeccable seeming legend said. "There are way too many of them. We can say them all day. You are completely right. In the end, we are all blessed with the intelligence to say whatever we can think of, and nobody can stop or control it." Suddenly his chest rose and fell, as he once again released those yipping laughs from earlier. And this time, it seemed to catch even James off guard, as the human snapped up slightly with his smile disappearing, and even took a step back from the laughing geezer. However, Athena had an amused smile on his face that didn't fit in any way with the verbal lashing he had just gotten from his interlocutor, and he even covered his face for a moment to quell some of his laughter. A shudder ran down Sheeta's back. The guy really was strange when seeing him in person. Finally, he stopped his laughing and looked back down at James, though the smile was still very much on his face as he asked the human,
"Say, when I announced that we from the Galactic Council had decided to disband, right after our reinstatement, do you remember what I said about that?"
James blinked a couple of times, seemingly still affected by the whiplash the man's reaction to his words had given him. However, after just a moment, he finally managed to take hold of his mental steering wheel again, and thus regain control over himself, as he quickly cleared his throat and tried his best to put on a serious expression once again. "You said it was supposed to be a gesture of good faith," James recalled as his answer. Obviously he remembered. That speech was one that you could not so easily forget, for one reason or another. Athena nodded enthusiastically at the words. Sheeta wasn't sure if it meant the same as when a human nodded, or if the old eccentric just couldn't hold his head still from excitement.
"Indeed, I am a fan of those, you know, of gestures that show what you truly think. Much more so than I am a fan of words," he elaborated, and another wave spread across his short fur like wheat being stroked by heavy winds, though this time his shudder seemed to stem from excitement. "Therefore, since you do not wish for me to speak to you, allow me to instead grant you another gesture of good faith."
James tilted his head slightly, as his face morphed into an expression that was unreadable, mostly because it clearly didn't know what it wanted to be. Confused, angry, afraid. It all had some part in there. Clearly he, just like everyone else who was listening to this declaration, had absolutely no idea what the old man was going to say next. It was as if the entire room, not just the audience this time, collectively took a breath and leaned a bit closer, as they all listened closely. Sheeta could even feel herself leaning forward a bit, even if it would do absolutely nothing to boost her hearing. Her body simply reacted on its own. And from what she could see in the corners of her vision, the human soldiers were very much doing the same.
"Well, I have been thinking about this for a while. However, until just now I wasn't so sure about it. After all, it was just a quick idea I had. Maybe it was foolish, but just now, you convinced me. I think you are the right person for this," the old man began to explain, although he really stalked a course with his long-winded elaborations and ambiguities, causing the anticipation to grow to almost palpable levels. But then, finally, it seemed like he was getting to the point. "Of course, I know it is really just a gesture, since I have no intention of abdicating any time soon. However, at my age, you can never really know. So it is about time I named someone for this, even if it is a bit late now."
Having said that much, he bowed down a bit further to get his face closer to James's. The smile on his lips grew.
"James, I know the election is coming up, and who knows what will happen after that. But for now, the galaxy still needs order. And since I am still an acting councilman until the next council is officially elected, I am part of that order," he said, his tone turning down a good bit on the eccentricity, and turning a lot more earnest as he beamed at the human. "However, as is the case for all councilmen, the gap will need to be filled should I be out for any reason at some point. And in my absence, I want to know this order in good hands. You say you are a problem I could ignore? Well, not anymore. Because as my gesture of good faith, I would like to declare you as the inheritor of my acting council position, so you will take my place, should anything come between me and my duties. What do you say?"
The old guy then reached out one of his arms, holding his four-fingered hand out to James for a handshake. Noticeably, it was his left one. Everyone was silent and stared at the scene with wide-open eyes and baffled faces. Many mouths even hung open. That was including James's, as he stared down at the offered hand. Out of all the faces in the room, his was by far the most baffled, stuck in the most utter disbelief Sheeta had ever seen. However, one thing was unlike everyone else's apart from its severity, and that was the aura behind it. because while everyone else seemed to be surprised and shocked, James seemed almost offended. Sheeda could basically hear the seconds tick down in her head, as James's stare slowly wandered away from the offered hand and up to the old councilman's face, staring quietly for some more seconds. Until finally he gave his answer. "No!" he exclaimed, with the same intensity that his baffled face had, shaking his head and moving to swipe the offered hand away. "No, no, 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 no! That is a terrible idea!"